Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Joining Michael on the show today is Cali Yost, who is a futurist, strategist, author, and keynote speaker who serves as the esteemed CEO of Flex Plus Strategy Group. Cali has the remarkable ability to unlock performance and enhance engagement through flexible workplace strategies. Now, as you'll hear, Cali has worked with many leaders during her career, and she mentions the lack of training and resources for current and future leaders. Now, it can be challenging, even for the most experienced business person or entrepreneur, to manage people. However, if you want to grow your business, this is an essential part. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team to receive personalized coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to learn more and apply today. Again, that is consultingsuccess.com. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit more about Cali, who has worked with renowned institutions such as the United Nations, EY, the Singapore government, and many other esteemed entities. Now, as you're listening to today's episode, there's a few things I want you to look out for. The first being the importance of being data-driven when making important decisions for your firm. How to market to future-thinking leaders and how to identify them. How to use a book to drive new leads for your company. How to develop the skills of your managers to help grow your business. Cali's secret to managing your work-life fit to grow your firm. And how to increase your fees without losing your customers. Here to share with you her incredible insight is Cali Yost. Enjoy.
So I thought where we'd start the conversation today is take us back in time a little bit. Before you started your consulting business, what were you doing?
So I graduated from Columbia Business School in 1995, and I started in this new emerging field of work flexibility strategy consulting in 1995. Yes, it was happening back then. I know we all think it's only since COVID, but it's not. And I worked for a think tank, which is where this all very much started. It was very academic, cutting edge, small think tanks were looking at it. And I worked for the very, very early stage thought leaders in this space and realized I didn't really think the way we were approaching it was going to work. I had been a banker, a manager in a bank, frontline bankers. I worked in that bank for 7 years and I've been a manager for about 2. And I realized that for work to change, for it to be truly flexible, it had to actually be executed in the business. You can't just do a top-down policy, and that's kind of the approach they were taking. So I looked around. I tried to find other consulting firms that were doing this work, and they weren't. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to have to go out on my own. And that's when I started my consulting practice in 1998 is when I began.
So I have to ask you, because academics are not, often known as being the most entrepreneurial. And so coming from that background, and then especially for those who are joining us, who maybe also come from an academic background, how did you find, were there any advantages to that background in kind of the academic world and the think tank world? And at the same time, were there any kind of disadvantages or real challenges that presented for you?
So for me, the think tank academic background has been and continues to be very helpful in that I'm very disciplined in terms of the data-driven approach to what I do. So you had to be sharp and on point in terms of any kind of inference you were making from data. And that I continue to draw upon to this day. I think the thing that frustrated me, to your point, was I'm all about the business. This has always been about business for me. It's great to have the theory and the kind of, ultimate, everybody's happy fantasy world that I like to think about too. But I'm always very much about, all right, so how's this going to make a business more effective? So I bring both of those sensibilities together in my work and always have. So that's what I think the academic piece brings. But then I'm all real time, applied. And what does this mean? And that is the aspect that I bring from my banking background to this work that I do.
Yeah, I love kind of the focus that you brought up around almost like the power of data or be diligent with data. I was just talking with some clients earlier today about this idea of what I refer to as like specialized content, and in that a lot of people will put out general content, general information, but in the day that kind of the environment that we're in, it's very hard to stand out if what you're sharing is just general. If there's not real deep insights, perspectives, opinions, data, or a story inside of that, it's just hard to be known for it. And I think clients and the marketplace really appreciate somebody who can take it, kind of can use data or bring data to life. And I'm wondering, for those that might be in a similar position where they have a deep understanding of X being whatever it is that they're experienced in, but maybe have just been at the surface level in terms of their content creation. They haven't really gone deep into data. What advice would you have for them, or maybe like any best practices, or how did you go about, and how do you maybe still to this day use data, use research to really establish yourself as an authority, as an expert in a way that it helps you to build a business?
So we started doing research around the current state of work flexibility back, our first survey 15 years ago, 12 years ago. And so I partnered with ORC International, which is now branded something else, but it's a reputable data house. And we went out and we did a survey of full-time US workers and how they were experiencing the ability to flexibly work and manage their lives. And I always use that data to reinforce what I know works in terms of executing a flexible work strategy. So I'll give you an example. There's always this theory that women were the most of the flexible workers pre-pandemic. That is actually not true. And one of the things I try to say to people is how you ask the question. Okay. So for example, we would ask a question, where do you do most of your work? And there was an answer. I do most of my work from a remote location that is not on my employer's site. Doesn't matter if it's home, doesn't matter if it's a co-working space, doesn't matter. You're not in the actual office with everybody you work with. Now we found back 2018, 2015, a majority, like 1/3 of full-time US workers said they were doing their work from a remote location, not on their employer's site. And of that 1/3, a majority were men, women. And so I would keep raising my hand and say, I think we kind of think that most people who have flexibility are women. It's actually not true. So again, this allows me to stand in my knowledge and point something out when maybe the rest of the world thinks it's something else. And, I think it's worth it. It has always been worth it to me to make that investment in partnering with a data house that can get you that really solid data that then you can draw upon and use that to illustrate what it is that you do in terms of adding value to your clients.
I think that's a really good perspective and great advice, because there's a lot of different ways that people can get data today, probably more than ever before. And I agree. I mean, rather than just saying like, this is my opinion or this is what I believe, if you can just back that up and say, well, like, here's what I believe, but here's why. And it's not just something that I've seen or that I've thought about, like this is actually happening. That's a very powerful message. It stands out as well because people are drawn to numbers, percentages, dollar signs, right? Things of that nature. So let's fast forward a little bit. So you worked this think tank, right? You had the experience also working in a bank in a managerial position. You saw that things weren't really working the way that you believed that they could. So you decided to, I sounded like, look for maybe other consulting firms that
I did. I thought somebody's got to be doing this, and they weren't. And that's interesting, right? In terms of now, all of a sudden, all the big firms are diving in, and it's like, hey, you were not doing this until COVID hit. And so that's why I ended up going out on my own.
So you were quite early, right? The demand wasn't necessarily there or wasn't maybe as present, certainly as it is today. So walk us through, what was that environment like for you from, a lead generation kind of like client perspective? Where did your first few clients come from?
So I worked for sort of the White House, the kind of most prestigious think tank around these issues, which is Families and Work Institute, when I worked for them. And that gave me a lot of credibility in the market at the time. And so there were actually organizations, believe it or not, a lot of organizations, even before COVID, had flexible work arrangement policies in their businesses. And so I would find those organizations and those few leaders, really thoughtful, future-facing leaders who are like, you know what, flexibility, we got to make this the way we operate. And these policies are not working. And so we understand that you have an approach that can help us operationalize this. So come and work with us. So I really focused on that small universe of forward-facing leaders who knew that was not going to work. There were two drivers that were driving their vision. They were getting a lot of requests from talent for flexibility. They wanted to be able to offer that in a meaningful way that worked for their business as well as attracting talent. And they saw that as a competitive advantage. And also workspace, interestingly enough. I know we're all talking about how workspaces are not coming back to the way they were pre-COVID. And leaders were already starting to say, I don't need all this space. Like, I don't have everybody coming in here. Like, on average, my workspace occupancy is maybe 65, 60% at any given time. We need to rethink this. And open office spaces are not working. So a lot of this was already happening. Not a lot, but enough of it was happening where I would connect with those leaders and we would start to execute a more flexible operating model. That is where I focused my lead generation. And I will also say, and we can talk about this, I wrote 2 books. So we can talk about books and how important they are.
Let's put a bookmark into the book for a second. We'll come back to it. I really like how you weren't trying to go for necessarily a large market. You were focusing on, it sounds like, people who already were investing in this idea of flexible work arrangements. And if they were investing, they were at least interested in it. Like, they saw the value in it. They were, as you said, kind of more future thinking leaders. So rather than trying to find or target your marketing, your outreach to people who were just leaders and trying to convince them and educate them, you were really focusing on those that already saw that, which is, I think, a really important distinction for everybody who's joining us right now. So a couple of questions around that. The first is, how did you identify which organizations and which leaders were future thinking and were more likely to be open to that conversation?
Just talking to people and, as I like to say, presenting, getting in front of groups and presenting. And in many cases, most of the time, getting what I like to call the slow clap, which is like, that is fascinating. Not going to do it, but good to know. Okay. And then that one or two leader would come up afterwards and be like, okay, you are 100% right. We have got to talk to each other because, right? And so you kind of have to just put yourself out there.
Where were you speaking? Sorry to interrupt, but give us an idea of the kinds of places.
Where wasn't I speaking? Industry organizations. Somebody would say, hey, this interesting person we should probably talk to her. Let's see what she has to say. I'm going to come back to the books in a minute. Managerial leadership conferences. There was always something, and usually the angle was through women, right? How do we attract and retain women? And about 10 years ago, I cut that. I was like, this is not about women. And so I would go in through that, but then say, this isn't about women. And I had my data and the whole thing. Really, it was just where this topic around whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or women, or technology, workspace, flexibility. I just found, SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, conferences. Again, where are people just kind of talking about these topics? I had a little bit of a different angle, and people would say, come and tell us what you think. And
so it sounds like you're leveraging your network through the different connections that you have. Number one, even before that, you've kind of developed your perspective, which is backed by data. So you have a message that is different than maybe the standard that is out there, but it's supported by data, which is compelling. And therefore, different organizations are actually open to hearing it because they like that kind of stuff. And then the third part there is that, you're presenting, you're getting in front of people, you're finding where are the places that my ideal clients are kind of congregating and where can I then get in front of them? Was there anything else that you were doing at that time?
That was an excellent recap. Exactly what I did. I will say one thing though. I was looking for the leaders who were going beyond flexible work arrangements. Okay. They were understanding that this is about the way we need to operate. We need to work across these different dimensions of on-site, remote, different times, leveraging technology. Like, they had a very much more comprehensive picture about work beyond the traditional work model. So those would be the people that would resonate to what I had to say and understood, yes, this is the future. We're going to go there. I'm going to help you. They know I can help you get there.
At what stage of this journey did you write your first book?
Okay. So, 15 years ago, one of the things that I would talk about was that if you created flexibility, you would help people balance their work and life. And I would go in, and that was just one of the outcomes. Obviously, there was productivity and workspace, but balance was one of the outcomes. And I would see leaders just glaze over, like just glazed, could not go there with me. And one day, and then I would try harder, right? So one day this leader took pity on me and he said, look, I'm going to tell you right now, you say that B word, all I hear is work less. And we have so much work to do. And out of nowhere, I just said, you know what? It isn't about balance. It's about how you fit your work and life together and help people do that in a way that allows them to still contribute in the business and have that. And he just sparked up. He was like, oh, I get it. Okay, I have a work-life fit that works for me, but so and so. It was like night and day. And I thought, what just happened? And I rewound the tape and I realized it was this concept of work-life fit. And I just kept using it as a way to explain how you're going to benefit the organization and support your people. And I thought, okay, we got to teach people how to manage their work-life fit, because the company can give you flexibility, but you have to go out and grab it and use it, right? So I wrote my first book because I couldn't find anybody out there talking about how to fit your work and life together, leveraging that flexibility that you would have at your workplace. So I wrote my first book, which was about how to do a formal reset, like formally change how, when, and where you would work with a formal plan. And when I went out and promoted that book, people were talking to me about, oh, but I need just like the day to day, like how do I walk my dog, or how do I, and I thought, okay, so the first book was about the resets. The second book was called Tweak It, and how to do the small shifts in how, when, and where you work. So that's the tweaks. So I had the resets and the tweaks, and that became the skill set for individuals. And that's why I wrote my books, because I saw it was missing. Like, we were talking about managers, we were talking about leaders, but not about people and what they need to do to be effective in this flexible work and life reality they found themselves in. So that's why I wrote my books. I found a missing piece of the market. And then that became part of my delivery model, but then also what I went out and talked about.
All right. So I appreciate that breakdown. So a few things about that. The first that I want to point out for everybody joining us that I think is just incredibly important is that you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, would not have had that realization, kind of like the light bulb moment that, oh, my messaging of what I'm saying using the word balance is not resonating, but something else now is, if you weren't out there having conversations. So, right, like the idea of getting the business plan ready and just trying to perfect things and playing with your website and overthinking things is not going to cut it. You need to out there and have conversations to ultimately validate and find that right fit. So that's number one. Number two, the hesitation a lot of people have when they think about writing a book, because everybody has a book inside of them, right, is I don't have the time. So to walk us through, how did you, using your word fit, how did you fit the book writing kind of process into working with clients, doing work, taking care of family, or whatever it might be? Just kind of give us the plan that you use or how you kind of navigated that.
All right. So I'm going to tell you the truth. Okay. It is a lot of work. Books are a lot of work. I probably put more of myself into those books than maybe a lot of other people do. I enjoy the process of that. And it helps me think about how I'm thinking. It really helps me work through my approach. So when I knew I had a book in me, I had to plan in advance. Like, I had to put money aside. And part of my model is I have consultants who work for me in a flexible way, right? So I would give them the heads up, like, I'm going into book mode, and then they would know, cool, we're going to take a pause while you do your books. And I wrote the books, and that's how I did it, is I would put time aside to just get the proposals written. Then you pitch it. Then I would do some work. And then when the book got sold and I had to write it, then I had to put time aside again. Now, that is not the only way to do this. You can hire people to help you write books, and people do that. I did it myself. That's not how you have to do it, but that's how I managed how to fit those into everything else I was doing.
So you talked about putting money aside, which I appreciate you kind of bringing that up. I'd love if you get a little bit more tactical or detailed around that. Like, how did you decide how much money to put aside? How are you kind of thinking about that? How much time were you giving yourself? Just so people might be able to get a sense of what was your decision-making process around that? Like, was it 1 month, 3 months, 12 months? Like, how much money were you?
First time, I didn't put enough away because I didn't realize how long it took. The second time, I knew it was going to take longer. So again, I always see these books as like an investment in my company, right? So even if I'm not necessarily taking away as much a month as I normally would have, to me, it was like, I'm investing in this is time invested. So I would say the first time I probably said, oh, 3 months, like that'll be fine. The second time I probably did more 6 months, but I also had seen the return from the first book.
And when you say 6 months, do you mean essentially like what your income would have been over a 6-month period? And so that's kind of saved, parked in the bank. So you don't have to be stressed out about, do I have the cash flow to survive this?
Right. Because I just knew I couldn't do a lot of business development and a lot of client service as I was writing the book. So that's kind of how I approached it. But again, it maybe wasn't the full amount I would take for a month.
Enough to cover living expenses and not feel stress.
Exactly. Like in my case, it was childcare. Okay. That's my biggest thing that I had to cover because I had 2 little kids. Obviously, my husband, we planned it all together, but I didn't want to have to let my nanny go. So that was my big expense.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Okay, so you have book 1, you have book 2. Just walk us through, what are these books doing for you? And even before that, what are you doing with the books to use them to grow the business? What kind of, if you take us back to the kind of the benefit of hindsight, what do you feel worked best? If somebody was planning to write a book as well right now, how would you suggest that they leverage that book to grow their business?
So the way I describe books, it's funny. 2 things. First, as I said, it really does help you organize your thinking, and it does help you hone in on how you want to present something. And in no other way that I have ever found. I don't know. And again, this is me. Second thing is, a book is a moment in time where people pay attention. So when you have a book that comes out, people are, oh, a book. Like, they may never read the book, although I will tell you, P.S., 15 years later, it is amazing the number of people who've come up to me and said, your book changed my life. Like, I found your book. I was able to fit my work and life together in ways so that is rewarding 15 years later, all those people. But in the moment, it is a period of time where people will say, oh, let's pay attention to what they have to say. That's interesting. And that just gives you some exposure that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that was 15 years ago. Then the last one I wrote was 7 years ago. And that still held for me.
Or were you promoting like through sending emails? Were you talking when you're giving presentations?
Oh, yeah. Because you go out and you say, I have a book coming out. I would let people want to have you speak. Let's have you come and speak, and so it does allow you to book business. It does it now. In my case, this content then became part of my consulting delivery, right? Like, part of the execution of a high performing flexible work strategy is giving people these skills and tools. So that was the other piece of it as well. It just rounded out.
So you're developing your intellectual property in the format of a book, but the IP inside of the book, you're also able to use as part of projects and in delivery. Okay, so let's take us to the current day. From a marketing perspective, I mean, it sounds that the book had an impact, presentations had an impact. What's working today for you? Because the last book, as you said, was 7 years ago that it was published, the first one 15 years ago. So here we are, 2023. What's working for you today from a marketing and lead generation perspective?
What's working for me today is all of a sudden the whole world has woken up to the fact that there's flexibility, and it helps to be one of the few people out there that's saying, actually, I've been doing this for a while and this is not new. And here's how you want to think about moving forward. So it does help to have a long history of executing successful flexibility. And COVID really did fundamentally and forever change the way we think about work. And it accelerated a trend that was already underway. I will be honest, I'm shocked still at the number of organizations that think we can go back, but there are now enough who are just like, we're not going back. And now what are we going to do?
And when you say go back, what do you mean? Do you mean like people returning to the office full time and not working from home? Or just define, what does go back mean?
Go back means to go back to the traditional work model that was February 2020. And maybe in that case, there were more days in the office than perhaps are going to happen going forward. But for me, go back means, we're going back to the way we did things in February 2020, where I think we all still kind of bought into the traditional work model as like the model. Okay. Like the model is you go to the office 5 days a week and 9 to 5. But that was already disappearing before COVID, but it was random. There was no strategy around it. It was just kind of happening. And as I said, COVID just kind of accelerated all of that to its most extreme form. And now we're coming back to the middle and we're saying, all right, so we're not going back there, but that is not sustainable necessarily or even effective. So what does this new way of working look like? How do we take the best of what we learned in COVID, but add back what probably got lost in the sauce? Because it was not an intentional, thoughtful way of executing a flexible work model. So again, I'm finding there are leaders who are just like, we're not going back, but we got to move forward in a more intentional way. And what does that look like?
What is the data telling you right now when you identify or kind of look at organizations that you've either studied or that you worked with who you feel are just really effective, achieving success, making things happen? What is that new model, or what does that kind of best practice model look like from a workforce kind of perspective? And I'm asking just from, maybe through the frame of number one, a consultant who is building a team and maybe they have 10 or 15 people, or maybe they're working towards that, or maybe, even more, but also the consultant that is maybe going into work with organizations. I mean, if you could give us a little bit more kind of detail around what are those high performing, effective organizations doing in terms of from a structure perspective that you feel is the future?
That's like, and I'm going to say this to you because we're all consultants here. Okay. That is like your worst consultant answer, but it is the truth. It really depends. It depends on your business. It depends on what you do. It depends on how you're sourcing your talent. It depends on, do your clients require you to be in person on site? I mean, I think we all have to remember a majority of workplaces, people have to be on site. That's still true today. Now, that does not mean that there can't be some degree of flexibility in terms of time or the way they structure schedules or what have you, but they have to be there. And so that is something to think about. So if you're a consultant that serves clients, for the most part, who have to be there, then, you might have to be there. Now, it doesn't have to be there all the time, maybe not, but there's an aspect of that you have to think about.
To the consultant that, sorry to interrupt, I just want to clarify one.
Yeah.
For the consultant, let's say it does have a team and they're thinking about, well, what's the best practice for me? I want to make sure that we can be effective. Should they be thinking about, so that they can work virtually, they might be working kind of on site? I guess my question is, maybe what are the biggest misconceptions or mistakes that you see people making in that position where they're a leader, they have a team, it's somewhere between 10 to 25 people? What should they be thinking about avoiding? Or again, what are the mistakes or the misconceptions kind of around that? The first and biggest misconception is you start with the where. Start with days in the office. Don't do that. Start with the what. Start with the work. Then ask yourself, okay, based on what it is we need to do, how, when, and where do we do that best? And that's our foundational question for high performance flexibility. It's just, what do we need to do? And then how, when, and where do we do it best? You start with the what, then you look at the where. Because what happens is you start focusing on the where and days in the office. Okay, people show up, they're doing the same stuff they were doing when they weren't there. And they get disengaged. You're not intentional. It doesn't work. So, and I think with the consulting business, there isn't just there's just a basic flexibility there in many cases that you just then have to think about structuring so that you are serving your clients in the way they want to be serviced, but then giving people the flexibility to do aspects of their work that doesn't require them to necessarily be in an office. And really also making sure you are then finding the technology that enables that work and making sure it's being used effectively. Managers have to manage. They just do. And I think we may be moving to a world where we have to revisit whether you can just have some solid subject matter experts on your team who just don't love to manage, and that's okay. But you have to have people in managerial roles when people are working across these different dimensions who really are good at setting priorities, making sure people have the resources they need, coordinating across these different dimensions, and they themselves are comfortable with the technology. Why is that more important now? Like because it sounds like you're saying that in this new model, and I'm resonating with what you're saying, but I want to really clarify for the benefit of everybody. How is that different in this, let's say, the new model, as opposed to the old model of having, let's say, subject matter experts, but then it sounds like you're saying there's a real importance, a real key to having people they're able to manage maybe project management experience, their operations focused. Why is that so important kind of now compared to before?
All right, I'm going to tell you what I believe, Michael. Challenge me on this. There are two things that I believe before COVID that are really important now. Managers weren't really managing great before COVID. When I would go into organizations, and my experience is it kind of covers every industry. Before COVID, I would go in and there'd be more remote work happening, more time flexibility, and managers would come up to me inevitably every project and say, you know what, how do I know they're working? I can't see them. And my answer was always the same. It's easy. How are you doing it now? Just keep doing that. Blank stare. We weren't training managers to be really effective for the most part. And there are people who just don't like to manage. Okay, they just don't. They don't like it. They're not good at it. And that has to be okay, because in the past,
a lot of people that actually have like management, they had the manager label in terms of their title. But as you're saying, they weren't necessarily trained with a real focus on how to effectively manage people, teams.
And they maybe didn't like it. I mean, so we have to really make sure that managers have the skills, especially if they're managing people they don't see necessarily, or they're managing people they are working asynchronously with as well as in real time. That's a skill. So we have to train people. And the other piece of this is you have to be comfortable in technology. You have to understand how to use the technology that's available to you to coordinate the work. Make sure you put some norms in place so people are all coming at it in the same way. We didn't do that very well before COVID. And so again, this is all the things that when you are thinking about how you're leading your team in the consulting world, you want to start with the work, structure it in a way, how, when, and where that work is happening to serve your clients and make sure you can access the talent that you need, but then ensure that people know how to manage and they're using the technology. And also your workspace. Don't just get rid of all your workspace. I am seeing people make the craziest decisions around workspace right now when they don't even know how people are working. And so you're going to have to think about, what do I need in terms of physical space to enable this way we work and support the things that we've identified happen better when we're in person, so that space is available.
Yeah, I love that. I think so true. It's my experience as well, seeing people who have maybe had that manager title, they consider themselves to be a manager or kind of senior level experience, but they don't actually maybe love managing, or they're not actually that good, that part of it. So I think that's a really important kind of reminder for people as they are thinking about building teams, or even bringing on somebody in a fractional or contract kind of, type of role. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is huge, is focusing first on what instead of where, because to me, that kind of signals the focus should be more on the outcome and kind of the result, and less on like the deliverable of, where are we going to kind of do this? It's more about, what do we need to do to create success? I think that's a really great question to ask, because then depending on if everybody's aligned and clear on what the outcome needs to be or what success looks like, then you can kind of reverse engineer that and figure out, well, where do we need to be? How do we need to do it? What technology do we need? What kind of reporting cadence do we need, or whatever? So I think that's a really good reminder for people. I want to ask you another question about this fit, because you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about it and seeing some of the best practices as well as when things go wrong. So for you yourself, you're running a consulting business. You have team members in a kind of a contractual type of structure and arrangement. You have kids, right? Family. How do you manage your own life? Or I guess like that, the integration of doing your work and growing a business at the same time. And I ask this because this is kind of a question that comes up for many of our clients as they are growing. And very often it's like somewhere where they're higher 6 figures into 7 figures per year. They're building a team. And it's like, hey, we're growing, we're doing well. Now there's like a lot more going on. And on the business side, yes, I'm successful, but I'm starting to feel a little bit maybe drained or overwhelmed. How do I navigate that? How do I continue to grow the business? Because that's what I want to do. But I also want to make sure that I'm enjoying my life and spending time with my kids or elderly parents or whatever it might be. So I'm wondering, how do you think about that? And if there's any kind of best practices that you can share around it.
So in the early years of my consulting practice, I really did focus on those leaders that saw the future and were willing to do the work that I added value to, right? So remember, before COVID, that was a pretty limited universe. And so I managed to that. And I will say, I always got the questions when I would go into organizations like, gosh, you're so lucky you work for yourself. That must be so. I mean, I have some control over how, when, and where I work, but I still have clients, right? And I have to be even more thoughtful and intentional about when I shut down and what I'm doing. One of the reasons I wrote my second book is I would meet these people in organizations I called the work-life fit naturals. These would be people who come up to me and be like, why are you here? Like, this is just like brushing your teeth. I'm like, okay, it is not. And I'm going to tell you right now, you are unusual. So I studied them for years to learn their secrets, mostly because I wanted to know. I was like, how are you doing this? And okay, so here are the basic secrets. And I do this myself. Number one, they keep a shared calendar with all their work and personal to-dos in the same place. And why my book is called Tweak It is they break their priorities, their work and personal priorities down into these small units, and they put them on their calendar. So if you find that there's something that's not happening, they're like, you got to put it on your calendar. And then just each week you go in and you make sure that you're prioritizing the things that really matter to you. And then my other favorite secret is they celebrate success. So I am so like high, I have like a high bar. If I didn't get everything done, I'd be like, well, you know what? Forget it. Like, right. And they'd say, why are you doing that? Like, you got 50% done of what you wanted to get done. That's great. And then the next week you'll do something. So I celebrate success. I keep that shared calendar. And I really do try to intentionally make those things that matter to me happen. Now, the last 3.5 years have been insane. Okay. Just the level of opportunity and growth. And I have had to be very thoughtful again about each stage. Who am I serving? What do I want to be doing? What's missing? And I probably overdid it on the work part at certain points.
You mean like taking on too much work?
Too much, right? And so I've had to, there have been periods over the last 3.5 years, I've had to step back and say, you know what, either I'm going to take on another person or I'm going to think about exactly who I'm serving and make sure that I'm again resetting in that intentional way. But it's hard when you have it is great when you are a consultant to have control over your time, but it's hard.
And how have you thought through that? So I think that's a great kind of question to bring up that a lot of people are considering or have considered. In order to grow, you either need to bring on another person or maybe more than one person. And that might be part-time, full-time contracts, freelance, whatever, but like you need another, brain and body, let's say. Then the other side of it is, well, if you're not going to do that, then you need to make changes inside of the business. Maybe it's systems or automations or structure, or maybe it's being more intentional or more restrictive in terms of what you say yes and what you say no to, or maybe you're increasing your pricing strategies. So how did you personally kind of think through that when you decided that you want to make that decision? What was the conversation kind of going through your mind, and ultimately which path did you take?
So for me, again, it came down to where am I value adding, right? And so I'll give you a concrete example. There was a whole period of time where people were like, help us put our hybrid policy together. I'm like, I don't do hybrid policy. I come in and help you put in place a strategic, flexible operating model. Like, I look at the work and then how do we do it? Like, that's a whole other thing. And you know what? That's not what I don't do that. So I had to say, no, that's not what we do. And I had to really be disciplined about that. And it's hard. That's opportunity, right? You're like, oh, I can do that. That's easy. Right. But that's not where I add value. My pricing structure, I definitely had to change that.
How do you change the pricing structure before you go into that next one?
Just again, when you're looking more at how you are operating as an organization, that's a higher level strategy consulting process. And so I priced myself as a strategy level consultant. So I did increase my fees, not tremendously, but I just hung in, like I stuck to it. I didn't, I'll just do that. No, this is what it is.
When that last part there, do you mean that around during COVID, a lot of people would discount or they would?
Right. They just like, oh, well, can you just do it for this and help it?
So you said, I'm either increasing fees or I'm staying where I've been. I'm not going to discount or reduce my fees just given what's going on.
For volume, right? Like, it's tempting to be like, oh, if I get the volume. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to keep it here. I did bring on a couple of additional resources to try to help with some of that automation and that systematizing things and putting in place some training that I didn't have before. But again, it's what do you want? And you also have to look at your definition of success. And this is one of the things I wrote about in my first book. And I think we don't talk about it enough, which is how do I define success? And for me, the different categories are prestige, advancement, money, and caregiving are the four sectors that I look at. And when my kids were little, it was hardcore caregiving, right? Like that was important to me. But as my kids have gotten bigger and COVID hit, I was more just like, all right, I'm going to advance. I'm going to make some more money. And there's a level of prestige that's important to me in terms of being recognized as an early leader in this field. And so I would like that to happen. And caregiving wasn't so much in the mix because I didn't have little kids. You and I have talked. I had to reschedule this interview because now my dad's sick. And so as I think about my next level of growth over the coming, couple months, I'm putting that a little more into the equation, maybe.
Sure. Different. I think you emphasize or you focus more on depending what's happening around you during that kind of stage or season of life. And I think that's a really important reminder because if you just have your head down, working hard to build and to grow, you can really lose track of what success ultimately means. And I'm all for making money and, being an entrepreneur and building businesses is what I've done for the last 20 plus years. But at the same time, it's for me personally very important to be intentional with that and to define what does success actually mean to me, and making sure that the businesses that we create support the lifestyle that I want to have, and not that I have to sacrifice my lifestyle to create a business that I want to have. So I always kind of look at making sure that lifestyle is at the apex, right, the top of the triangle, as opposed to at the bottom. So I love that, Cali. There's so much more that we could continue to dive into, and we're just really kind of scratching it at the surface. But I want to be respectful of the time that we have in the calendar here. Where should people go to learn more about you, about your books, about everything that you have going on?
You can go to the Flex Strategy Group. So that's FLEXstrategygroup.com, and it's all there. My books are Work Plus Life, Finding the Fit That's Right for You, and Tweak It. And they're both available on Amazon. And if you go to our site, we do have we call it the Work Flexibility Scorecard, where you can go in and get a general sort of output where you stand on the different dimensions of high performance flexibility. So that's something new you can do as well.
Perfect. All right. We'll link all that up in the show notes. And then one final thing, just talking about your books, obviously people will can check that out. But is there a book that you have read or listened to in the last 6 months? Could be fiction or nonfiction, but just something that has really resonated with you that you think others might enjoy as well.
Okay. I'm a huge Rick Rubin fan. So Rick Rubin has a new book out, and
What's on creativity or something, is it called?
On creativity, yes. Oh, I highly recommend it. Highly, highly, because I'm going to tell you, he lays out because people said to me, how did you know about this in 1995, right? And if you follow Rick Rubin's philosophy, it will lead you in your path. And that is exactly what I've done. So I read Rick Rubin's book and I'm like, okay, this is what I did. And this is exactly how it worked out. So go read Rick Rubin's book. Huge fan. It will really be worthwhile.
Fantastic.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation between Cali and Michael. If you did, then as always, be sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you want to help support the Consulting Success Podcast, you can either leave a rating and review over an Apple Podcast or share this episode out with a friend or colleague who you feel like would truly enjoy listening to today's conversation. Quick reminder, if you want to work directly with the Consulting Success team to receive personalized coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to learn more and apply today. Thank you again so much for listening to today's episode. It's the end of the line for us this week. Until next time.